What if I shared that Edgar Cayce, the most extensively documented psychic in America, provided critical warnings regarding 3 distinct forms of psychic interaction that could potentially ruin your spiritual growth and even compromise your mental health? Across more than 14,000 recorded readings over 4 decades, Cayce not only uncovered the marvels of spiritual enlightenment, but also cautioned against the negative aspects of psychic experiences that many spiritual mentors tend to avoid. Have you ever felt an urge to reach out to spirits, delve into psychic abilities, or connect with departed relatives? Before you respond, it's crucial to consider what Cayce revealed during his profound trance states. These warnings were not merely theoretical. They stemmed from real incidents where individuals' lives were irreparably harmed due to inappropriate psychic interactions. Over the next 20 minutes, I will outline the 3 distinct types of psychic contact that Cayce indicated could ruin your life, drawing from verified cases found in the archives of the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. You will gain insights into the warning signs identified by Cayce, learn why certain psychic activities drew what he referred to as destructive forces, and most importantly, comprehend how to safeguard yourself while cultivating your spiritual abilities securely. But first, allow me to present a case that left even Cayce's stenographer, Gladys Davis, who documented thousands of his sessions, utterly astonished. This story revolves around a woman whose pure intention to communicate with spirits resulted in what Cayce termed as total possession by entities that nearly shattered her family. In Reading 54011, delivered in 1944, a frantic husband reached out to Cayce regarding his wife's situation. She had started to engage in automatic writing, aiming to connect with her late mother. Initially, the messages were reassuring, but they soon turned into something frightening. The woman began uttering voices that were not her own, making predictions that materialized, yet carried sinister implications, and revealing details about private family issues that she should have been unaware of. But hold on, it takes a darker turn here. During his session, Cayce disclosed that the woman had made herself vulnerable to what he referred to as earthbound entities. These were spirits that had passed away, but were unwilling to ascend to higher realms. They didn't represent her caring mother attempting to reach out. Instead, they were troubled, frequently harmful souls that thrived on the energy of the living to prolong their earthly presence. This instance illustrates the initial category of perilous psychic interaction that Cayce cautioned against during his readings. However, prior to outlining all 3 categories, I'd like to pose a question. Have you ever sensed that someone or something was attempting to reach out to you through dreams, meditation, or seemingly random thoughts that didn't originate from you? Keep that inquiry in mind, as in just 3 minutes, I will recount the reading that compelled Cayce himself to halt a session, a rarity in his extensive career. Before we delve into that, it's important to understand how Cayce's psychic abilities evolved and the significance of his warnings. Edgar Cayce did not enter the world with psychic abilities in a sensational manner. Raised in Hopkinsville, Kentucky during the 1880s, he was a deeply religious young man who was initially apprehensive about his emerging talents. His first recorded psychic incident happened when he experienced a loss of voice that lasted for several months. In a moment of desperation, he induced a trance on his own and diagnosed the issue, revealing a solution that fully restored his voice. This marked the start of his 43-year journey of providing psychic readings while in a profound trance state. What set Cayce apart wasn't merely his precision, it was his reliable connection to what he referred to as the Akashic Records, a universal repository holding all the details about each soul's experiences across various lifetimes. This is what transforms our perspective on psychic phenomena. Cayce was adept at differentiating between various sources of psychic insights. He recognized messages originating from the higher self, from elevated spiritual advisors, from the Akashic records, and importantly, from lower vibrational entities that could bring about harm. After conducting thousands of readings, Cayce gained a profound insight into the mechanics of psychic contact, and crucially, the potential pitfalls. His cautions stemmed not from fear or religious beliefs, but from observing the real outcomes when individuals engaged in psychic openness without adequate preparation or safeguarding. Now, I'd like to introduce the first form of hazardous psychic connection that Cayce consistently cautioned against in his recorded readings. This initial harmful type is what Cayce referred to as earthbound entity attachment. In his analysis of 281-27, he clarified that individuals who pass away with intense earthly ties, such as to addictions, unresolved rage, material belongings, or certain individuals, may hesitate to proceed toward the light. Consequently, they linger in what Cayce referred to as a liminal space between the physical and spiritual realms. These spirits, bound to the earth, are attracted to those who are psychically receptive or emotionally fragile. They can attach themselves to such people and start to sway their thoughts, feelings, and actions. Cayce documented instances where individuals unexpectedly acquired addictions they had never previously experienced, displayed unprovoked violence, or began to articulate knowledge beyond their understanding. However, hold on. Here's the alarming aspect that Cayce discussed in Reading 57564. These beings not only affect behavior, but can progressively dominate an individual's personality. Family and friends often observe significant transformations, including new mannerisms, changed speech patterns, and entirely shifted values and interests. In extreme situations, Cayce mentioned that the original soul might be relegated so far into the background that it effectively becomes a captive within its own body. The indicators Cayce noted involve abrupt shifts in personality, awareness of information a person has never encountered, communicating in languages or voices unknown to them, and an intense fascination with themes associated with death or darker spiritual pursuits. In Reading 113-18, Cayce recounted a situation involving a teenage girl who engaged in automatic writing and, after a few months, was channeling entities that urged her to inflict harm on her family. What many individuals fail to understand about the attachment of earthbound entities is that it frequently starts with seemingly harmless spiritual activities. Practices such as Ouija boards, automatic writing, efforts to connect with deceased relatives, or even specific forms of meditation can create vulnerabilities if conducted without adequate spiritual safeguards. Cayce persistently highlighted in readings, such as 468, that the fundamental safeguard lies in sustaining a heightened spiritual vibration through prayer, visualizing oneself enveloped in white light, and consistently invoking protection from the Christ consciousness before engaging in any psychic endeavors. He cautioned that mere curiosity, without appropriate spiritual preparation, could lead to perilous vulnerabilities. In just 3 minutes, I'll disclose the second category of psychic contact that Cayce indicated is even more hazardous, as it is frequently confused with authentic spiritual guidance. But first, allow me to recount the experience of a family from Virginia Beach who disregarded Cayce's warnings regarding earthbound entities. The Thompson family, noted in ARE records from 1938, began to encounter what they believed was communication from Mrs. Thompson's late father. The messages arrived via dreams, conveying a sense of love and protection. The spirit cautioned against family threats that later materialized, offered financial guidance that was fruitful, and delivered solace in tough times. However, over time, the tone shifted. The entity started insisting on daily communication sessions, expressed anger when overlooked, and began imparting information aimed at instigating family disputes. Mr. Thompson reached out to Cayce, explaining how his wife had grown entirely reliant on these interactions and refused to make any decisions without the spirit's input. In Reading 2067-3, Cayce disclosed that the family's initial contact was genuinely with Mrs. Thompson's father. However, over time, the ongoing communication drew other earthbound entities, which ultimately displaced the father's spirit and started to masquerade as him. These parasitic beings thrived on the family's emotional energy, deliberately sowing chaos to elicit more intense feelings for their sustenance. This case exemplifies why Cayce consistently cautioned against extended or regular engagement with those who have passed. Regardless of how harmless it may seem at first, in Reading 254-101, he elaborated that such interactions can hinder the deceased's spiritual advancement while opening dangerous avenues for harmful entities. Next, we encounter the second category of perilous psychic interaction that Cayce cautioned against during his recorded insights. This second harmful type is referred to by Cayce as false guide deception. Its danger lies in the fact that it frequently masquerades as authentic spiritual advice, sometimes persisting for years before its detrimental characteristics are revealed. In Reading 70-71, Cayce elaborated on how certain entities portray themselves as enlightened spiritual mentors, angels, or ascended masters. They offer advice that appears wise, deliver precise predictions, and gradually establish total trust with their human counterparts. The individual experiences a sense of uniqueness, being selected, and a heightened spiritual state due to this connection. However, Cayce disclosed in Reading 1135-6 something that astonished even seasoned researchers. These misleading guides possess a particular motive. They aren't earthly human spirits, but rather what Cayce described as negative thought forms, entities brought into existence by intense negative thoughts and emotions that have gained a semblance of independent life in lower spiritual realms. These deceptive guides draw on human spiritual energy and aspirations. They slowly cut off their victim from acquaintances, fostering a feeling of spiritual superiority, and promote practices that appear to be advanced, yet actually diminish the individual's spiritual vibration. The victim comes to believe they are experiencing unique divine insights, while in reality, they are being controlled by parasitic forces. Cayce recorded a particularly unsettling instance in Reading 378-14, where a woman had been guided by what claimed to be an ascended master for more than 5 years. The entity shared intricate teachings related to spiritual growth, accurately forecasted future occurrences, and offered the woman a deep sense of purpose. She separated from her family, relocated to a secluded area, and started instructing others based on these messages. However, pause for a moment, as this is where the trickery revealed itself. The entity slowly started promoting behaviors that distanced the woman from typical human interactions. It asserted that the negative energies of others were hindering her spiritual growth. The meditation methods it introduced ultimately exposed her to greater entity manipulation instead of authentic spiritual engagement. When the woman eventually reached out for assistance from Cayce, his reading uncovered the full extent of her deception. The entity in question was not an ascended master. Rather, it was what he referred to as a collective negative thought form, forged through ages of human spiritual pride and ego. It exploited her authentic spiritual yearning to sustain its own existence while progressively undermining her capacity to differentiate truth from falsehood. Cayce pinpointed several warning signs of deceptive guidance, which include advice that fosters isolation from loved ones, teachings that elevate spiritual superiority over others, messages that pander to the ego by asserting a special status, and directives encouraging the abandonment of traditional spiritual practices in favor of obscure or unconventional approaches. In his reflections on 262-52, Cayce articulated that authentic spiritual guidance never leads to estrangement from love, does not promote ego enhancement, and consistently advocates for serving others instead of self-serving pursuits. According to him, genuine spiritual guides would never assert exclusivity or necessitate total reliance on their messages. Cayce consistently advised a specific protection method before engaging in any psychic or meditative activities. Invoke the Christ consciousness and clearly request that guidance aligned solely with divine love and truth be allowed. He stressed that authentic spiritual guides will honor this boundary, while deceptive ones may attempt to ignore or bypass such protective measures. In just 2 minutes, I will disclose the third and most perilous type of psychic interaction that Cayce faced. However, it's essential first to grasp the reason behind this warning, which arose from one of his most unsettling readings, an experience that left him physically ill upon returning from trance. This particular case involved a man from New York who believed he was undertaking advanced spiritual development. He had explored numerous esoteric doctrines, engaged in meditation for several years, and cultivated what appeared to be extraordinary psychic talents. He possessed the ability to foresee future occurrences, delve into others' thoughts, and even showcase seemingly miraculous healing capabilities. However, a troubling issue was arising. His family observed that in spite of his spiritual endeavors, he was growing more distant, calculating, and manipulative. Although his predictions were correct, they frequently centered around calamities and unfortunate events. His healing sessions occasionally resulted in recipients feeling exhausted and despondent for days. When the man sought a reading from Cayce, an extraordinary event unfolded. As recorded in Gladys Davies' notes, Cayce initiated the reading in his usual manner, but then unexpectedly became disturbed during the trance state. His body shook, and he used a voice that his stenographer characterized as one filled with dread and disgust. The reading disclosed that the man had unwittingly connected with what he termed the Brotherhood of Shadow, a collective of entities from lower realms intentionally aiming to undermine human spiritual growth. These were not mere random spirits of the earth or isolated deceivers. Instead, they formed a systematic attempt to disrupt the spiritual progress of humanity. This leads us to the third and most perilous kind of psychic interaction that Cayce cautioned against in his recorded readings. The third harmful type is what Cayce referred to as the Shadow Brotherhood infiltration. This indicates the most advanced and threatening form of psychic manipulation, as it directly focuses on genuine spiritual aspirants and subtly undermines their growth from the inside out. In Reading 254-95, Cayce discussed how certain organized groups from lower spiritual realms deliberately look for humans exhibiting true spiritual potential. Unlike earthbound spirits or deceptive guides acting alone, these shadowy entities operate together with a defined objective. Their aim is to steer human spiritual growth away from love and service and towards power and dominance. The manner in which they infiltrate is highly discreet. These entities do not introduce themselves as malevolent or sinister. Rather than that, they provide what seems to be profound spiritual wisdom, formidable psychic abilities, and the assurance of rapid spiritual growth. They frequently assert connections to age-old mystery schools or hidden spiritual traditions. However, Cayce's insights in reading 262.8 unveil why this trickery is particularly hazardous. The Shadow Brotherhood explicitly zeroes in on the human ego and spiritual arrogance. They present skills and insights that lead individuals to feel spiritually elevated, selected for exceptional roles, or fated to lead others spiritually. The individual truly thinks they are making spiritual progress as they acquire genuine psychic gifts and uncover hidden insights. However, Cayce cautioned that these gifts exact a heavy toll: the slow deterioration of the soul's empathy and its bond with divine love. In reading 267.77, Cayce detailed an example that exemplifies this trend. A prosperous entrepreneur delved into esoteric knowledge and cultivated impressive psychic skills through methods purportedly from an ancient spiritual lineage. He became capable of forecasting stock market trends, uncovering people's innermost truths, and showcasing what seemed to be miraculous healing abilities. However, his wife observed troubling transformations. In spite of his apparent spiritual growth, he increasingly exhibited arrogance, manipulation, and a fixation on gaining control over others. His prophecies and healings appeared to foster dependence instead of offering true assistance. His spiritual routines turned secretive and began to incorporate rituals that felt ominous and disconcerting. During a reading regarding this matter, Cayce disclosed that the man had been methodically misled by shadow entities, which offered actual power and insight, but solely to undermine the development of his soul. The abilities were authentic, yet they were energized by what Cayce referred to as inverted spiritual energy. This divine force flowed through darkness instead of light. One of the most unsettling elements of the Shadow Brotherhood's infiltration, as noted by Cayce, is that victims frequently remain unaware of their deception. The skills and insights they gain are both real and remarkable. They perceive themselves as spiritually evolved and often draw in followers who trust in their abilities. However, they have become conduits of spiritual decay, promoting methods and teachings that divert others from authentic divine connection. Cayce pointed out several warning indicators, such as spiritual practices that prioritize power over service, teachings that foster a divide between initiates and the general populace, the enhancement of psychic abilities coupled with reduced empathy, and an attraction to secretive or elitist spiritual groups that assert they hold exclusive knowledge that is not accessible to others. But there's something even more alarming that Cayce disclosed regarding Shadow Brotherhood activities in the U.S. In a report from 1933, identified as Rating 378 and 27, he cautioned that these groups were deliberately targeting American spiritual movements due to the country's significant impact on the evolution of global consciousness. Cayce indicated that the spiritual openness and religious freedom in America made it both a lighthouse for authentic spiritual growth and a main target for spiritual degradation. He anticipated that during the 20th and 21st centuries, Americans would face an onslaught of spiritual doctrines and practices aimed at misdirecting their spiritual journey from love and service to power and self-serving ambition. Evaluating contemporary American spirituality in light of Cayce's insights, it's evident that numerous current movements focus on attracting wealth, honing psychic abilities for personal gain, or attaining spiritual superiority over others. These are precisely the corrupt influences he forewarned would be fostered by shadow entities. So how can one safeguard themselves while still cultivating true spiritual abilities? Cayce offered distinct advice in reading 26289 that remains applicable today. Firstly, he highlighted that true spiritual growth inevitably fosters love, compassion, and a willingness to help others. Any method or teaching that instills a sense of superiority or disconnect from the suffering of humanity is misguided, no matter the psychic abilities it may create. Secondly, Cayce consistently conveyed that spiritual safeguarding arises from aligning with the Christ consciousness, not as a religious belief, but as a universal principle of divine love manifested through service to others. He suggested initiating every spiritual practice with a prayer, seeking this protection and requesting that only guidance in harmony with divine love be allowed. Third, he cautioned against engaging in spiritual practices that are conducted in isolation or kept secret. Cayce emphasized that true spiritual growth should enhance relationships and community ties rather than diminish them. Any advice that promotes a disconnection from family, friends, or essential human duties should be approached with skepticism. Fourth, Cayce highlighted the significance of spiritual discernment, which is cultivated through contemplation of divine love rather than self-interest. He taught that the deeper one's connection to divine love, the clearer the ability to differentiate between guidance that aligns with love and that which caters to ego or power. In reading 281-13, Cayce shared what many regard as his most significant teaching on protection. Maintain the mindset of being a conduit for blessings to others, and the path will reveal itself. For those who seek to preserve their lives must surrender themselves in service to others. He who aspires to gain the entire world yet forfeits his own soul, what benefit does that bring him? This principle acts as an excellent litmus test for any spiritual advice or practice. Does it enhance your capacity to bless others and embody love? Or does it mainly cater to your personal growth, power, or status? Cayce conveyed that this straightforward assessment could differentiate between authentic spiritual guidance and the three forms of perilous psychic contact he identified. I'd like to present one last example that highlights the effectiveness of these protective principles. In Case 540-17, Cayce detailed the experiences of a woman who had endured what appeared to be psychic attacks and harassment from entities for several months. She reported feeling perpetually exhausted, having unsettling dreams, and perceiving sinister energies surrounding her. Rather than suggesting intricate protection rituals or psychic defenses, Cayce encouraged her to redirect her energy towards serving others and meditating on divine love. Remarkably, just weeks after she altered her spiritual emphasis from self-protection to bestowing blessings upon others, the harassment ceased entirely. Cayce stated that entities attempting to siphon human energy struggle to withstand the elevated vibrations generated by true selfless love. This situation exemplifies what Cayce viewed as the highest form of protection against harmful psychic interactions. Immersing oneself in divine love and concentrating on helping others, which makes it impossible for lower vibrational entities to connect with your energy field. A significant insight gleaned from Cayce's 14,000 documented readings reveals that the same spiritual openness that might render an individual susceptible to harmful psychic encounters can also enable them to engage in remarkable spiritual service when appropriately safeguarded and channeled. The aim isn't to suppress psychic awareness, but rather to cultivate it securely within the context of divine love and aiding others. As we enter a time of unparalleled spiritual awakening in America and around the globe, Cayce's warnings resonate with even greater significance. The internet and social media, while disseminating authentic spiritual teachings, also facilitate the spread of distorted practices and misleading guidance that can misdirect seekers. However, it's important to note that Cayce emphasized that every individual has immediate access to divine wisdom through their higher self and their connection with Christ consciousness. You don't have to rely on external spirit guides or teachers for your spiritual growth. The best shield against harmful psychic interactions lies in cultivating a direct relationship with divine love and channeling that love through service to others. The three types of hazardous psychic interactions that Cayce cautioned against: earthbound entity attachment, false guide deception, and shadow brotherhood infiltration, each share a fundamental characteristic. They detach individuals from love, whether it's love for others or the acknowledgement of divine love present within themselves. Your spiritual journey is far too valuable to jeopardize through unguarded psychic exploration. Yet it's also crucial not to forsake it out of fear. Apply Cayce's insights to nurture your spiritual abilities securely, always within the safeguarding embrace of divine love and dedication to humanity. Which spiritual practices have captured your interest? Do they enhance your ability to love and serve? Or are they mainly aimed at personal power and self-improvement? Take a moment to sincerely assess your spiritual path based on Cayce's criteria. The development of your soul might hinge on your response.